teaching, as well as a few resources. Go ahead. So one of the first things I want to point out is there are 3 separate vocabulary standards in the applications of reading. So a lot of people may be wondering, why are there 3 different standards? Well, first of all, vocabulary has a tremendous impact on reading comprehension, which we will get into. Another reason is because vocabulary isn't just one thing. It actually overlaps with several other standards and indicators. And then also to appreciate really and truly how we can really break down vocabulary, not just as single words, but as the standard here talks about, is those word relationships. So the whole point of today is to really help you make sense of why there's 3 separate strands and 3 separate standards. All right, so let's start with, what does it mean to know a word? How do you actually define vocabulary? Well, here we go. What is vocabulary? Well, knowing a word includes the ability to do several things. First, it includes the ability to pronounce the word. So that includes words like cacophony or moot or utmost, not upmost, and not mute, and not cacophony. So in other words, in order to say we know this word, we have to be able to pronounce it correctly. We also have to understand how the word can be used and how it cannot be used. And there's a great story about a basketball player who was talking about how he could dribble with both hands. So he was amphibious. So not amphibious, he was ambidextrous. But again, you have to know how the words can be used and how they cannot be used in order to say we have a solid understanding of vocabulary. We also have to be able to spell the word, because the spelling of the word, as you see in there, and there, impacts the meaning of the word. We also have to understand the meaning of the word, and that's probably the first one we think of, but we truly have to understand the nuances in the definitions, such as the difference between poisonous and venomous, with venomous being something that would bite or inject the poison into you, as opposed to poisonous, which could be something that you even rub up against. And we also have to grasp the individual units of meaning in a word, because when we do understand those units of meaning, we appreciate why we don't need that prefix IR for irregardless. The word really is just regardless, but that's based on knowing that morpheme, that individual unit of meaning. Go ahead. Now, it also means that we have to be able to apply the word in various contexts. This gets very important when we talk about application. So let me give you a quick example of that. If you think about the word stand, there's not just one meaning, and it's not just one part of speech. There's actually 3 different verb meanings and 4 different noun meanings. So we have to know that in order to apply it to all of those different contexts. Go ahead. We also have to realize how the meaning changes when we add that unit of meaning, when we add that morpheme, how we go from friend, which is one, friends, which is more than one friend, friendly, which is an adverb describing an action, or befriend, which is a verb. We also have to understand how meaning changes when we pair it with other words. My favorite example of this comes from Mark Twain, who's famous for saying there's a big difference between lightning and a lightning bug, which is true. So when we pair words together, it can change the meaning of the individual word. Go ahead. We also have to internalize the part of speech, not necessarily to say this is a noun, this is a verb, this is an article, this is a preposition, but we have to understand how they fit together in a sentence. So for example, in general American English, we would not say badly cat, we would say bad cat. And that's because we know that we put the describing word before the noun in general American English, which is different for other languages. And then finally, we have to know the synonyms and antonyms. And that's one of the great things about the English language, is that we have so many synonyms and antonyms, and we use these to provide very specific information to paint a very clear picture, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Go ahead. So all of this to say, I hope you get from those last two slides, vocabulary is more than just providing a definition. In fact, there's no research. I've done the legwork. There's no research that says there's a positive effect from just looking up words in the dictionary. None. Go ahead. And the reason for that is because definitions are written to be as short and concise as possible, which means they may be using more or bigger words, more unfamiliar words in order to get the meaning across. So for example, the word set, S-E-T, it has 67 different definitions. So in terms of looking up the definition, which definition? And many words are that way. Go ahead, click on all the way through. So let me give you an example. So let's say the word is ambiguous, and you're going to have your students look up the word ambiguous in a dictionary. Look at the actual words in the definition. The meaning is liable to have more than one interpretation, or uncertain, or indefinite. So in order to understand the definition, you'd also have to know the word liable. You'd have to know interpretation. You'd also have to know uncertain and indefinite in order to comprehend the meaning from the definition. Go ahead. Click all the way down. So we also have to appreciate, multiple meaning words and those word relationships. Now we're really talking about figurative language. So I want you to think about how we know what the individual word means, raining. It's that form of precipitation that's actively happening. But what does raining cats and dogs mean? So again, when we put raining with cats and dogs, now what does it mean? Well, it means very heavy rain. And one of my favorite strategies to talk about at this point when we're talking about figurative language is to talk about the etymology of where this came from. And where raining cats and dogs came from was from the way back times when we didn't have sewers and underground piping. So what would happen is when it would rain very hard, the water would whoosh down the road. And so if it was raining really hard, all of that water was going to take whatever critter happened to be going down the road at the same time. So raining cats and dogs means raining so hard, cats and dogs are going down the road with it. Same thing for the word weather. We know what weather means, but what about when we put it with other words? That relationship now with under the weather. Well, that means feeling sick. But where does this come from? That comes from a sailing term. So it's a sailing related term, which means that if you're sick, you go below deck. And when you're below deck, you are under the weather. And then one more, because I just love these so much. Let's talk about the word skeleton. We know what that is, but what about when we pair it with other words? Skeleton in the closet. Does that mean the same thing as skeleton? No. So where does this come from in order to understand it? Well, it also comes from the way back times when doctors and physicians were not allowed to desecrate a human body after it had passed. But doctors and physicians knew that they needed to be able to see the inner workings of the body in order to figure it out. So they would hire grave robbers to rob the bodies out of the grave, and guess where they would hide them until the doctors and physicians could open them up? In the closet. So when we understand these word relationships and even where they come from, it gives great depth to meaning and to understand the meaning. Go ahead. So this is why vocabulary lists are not effective, because the vocabulary list in and of itself has to relate to the context that is being studied. So using again that example of the word stand, let's say in a story, there's a story about somebody was put something on a stand, like a music stand or a podium kind of stand. If you only have them look up the definition, and there's all those different definitions, they don't know which one it goes with. So that is why just a flat vocabulary list is not effective. Go ahead. So now let's talk about the tiers of vocabulary, because all vocabulary is not the same. And there's not a single and I've done the legwork on this one too, there's no vocabulary list that exists that says, by this age, you should know all of these words, or by this grade, you should know all of these words. And the reason is because vocabulary is very different. There's different kinds. So I want to explain this. This is referred to as the 3 tiers of vocabulary. And this is also listed in section 3 of your vocabulary support document. So your biggest tier, the most words you should have, the words that you commonly find in your everyday conversation, that's tier 1. So tier 1, again, are those common words you find in conversation every day. So that includes words like dog, door, car, grass, Chick-fil-A. Those are common words we use in conversation almost every single day. Well, maybe not Chick-fil-A, but if it's a good day, then yes. All right, so that is our base. So we've got to have a good foundation of tier 1 words in order to add our tier 2 words. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, tier 2 words, that is your sweet spot. That's your sweet spot. So let me explain. So tier 2 words are those words we find most frequently in a book. So tier 2 words are not going to be focused only on those tier 1 common words. Now we're going to be using more precise language, more tier 2 words in order to paint a clear picture. So tier 2 words include words like splendid or detest or absurd. So actually, Brenna gave a great example. She said that she was reading a book with her daughter one day, and the book used the word famished, and she asked what that meant. And why would an author use the word famished instead of just hungry? Well, because it paints a more clear picture, because we're not in everyday conversation. So we need to use words, those tier 2 words, to paint that very clear picture. And that's why authors use tier 2 words. And then finally, we get to tier 3 words. Tier 3 words are what we typically think of as vocabulary. Those are the ones that are very specific to a specific curricular content. So like isthmus, isosceles, hemisphere, all of those different terms that are highly specific to one curricular content area. Go ahead. So here's your example using one of my favorite books, Click, Clack, Boom. So when we're talking about tier 2 words and that sweet spot, the sweet spot for instruction, you want to make sure that you're teaching those words that will give away the most meaning that they're likely to see again. So talk about, why did the author use the word strike? Why did the author say the cows went on strike? Why not use the cows stopped making milk? Well, that would be everyday conversation, so strike is a tier 2 word. Here's another example. Why did the author use the term the cows were growing impatient? Why not just say the cows were tired of waiting on the electric blankets from the farmer? Again, impatient would be a tier 2 word, words we don't necessarily use in conversation, but the author uses them to paint a clear picture. And then finally, why not just say Duck didn't care? He didn't care either way. Why did the author use Duck was a neutral party? So all of that is a great example of how tier 2 is your sweet spot for instruction. Go ahead. So we're ready for an activity. Are you ready? So this is also in your handout. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment, and I want you to write it on your handout, type it in your handout, and even post it here in the chat. I want to see which words first. Let's talk about tier 3 words. Which words do you think are tier 3? Words that are highly specific to a curricular content area. Which would you say are tier 3 words? Go ahead and type that in the chat. Peninsula, absolutely. That's a tier 3. Photosynthesis, isosceles, entomologist, yes. All of these, yes, perfect. Now, I want to think about which ones do you think would be a tier 2? These are words that authors use to paint a very clear, specific picture, but they are not commonly found in everyday language. Oh gosh, y'all are doing great. Lanky, yes, that's not something we use in everyday language. Absurd, not in everyday language. Dormant could go either way. And that's kind of the thing about tier 2 and tier 3 words. It sort of depends on your foundational vocabulary. So yes, dormant could be both. Rural, I would say rural would be at tier 3 because we're talking about those aspects related to that social studies unit. Splendid, tier 2. We don't often use splendid. Coincidence, great tier 2 word. We would just say, oh my gosh, I can't believe those are like such, that happens. Muttered, all of the above, yes. I'll give you a moment to go ahead and fill in the rest. Any questions about your why one would be a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 word? You can either unmute or you could type it in the chat. Any questions about why one? Somebody has posted that their document is not working. I think Brenna's got a separate method to get that to you.
Yes, I'll do. I'll get it.
Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, here's another reason why understanding those tier 2 words is critical. When teachers, both K through 12 and preschool, when they use tier 2 words, when we use tier 2 words in our everyday conversation with our students, that is a significant predictor of vocabulary achievement, accounting for is as much as 1 standard deviation. That's 15 standard score points. That's enough to go from below average to average. In preschool, it's predictive of their word knowledge and reading comprehension in 4th grade. So I think there's often a desire or an inclination to water down our language, but don't. Make sure we're stepping up our language, that we're including those words like muttered or detest or splendid or absurd. Make sure we're exposing them to those, and I'm going to give you a reason why in just a moment. Go ahead. So with all of that to say, here's your say this, not that version. Here's an exact example of what you could do. So instead of saying, oh, I think we're going to have indoor recess because it's going to rain, use your tier 2 words. I anticipate we're going to have indoor recess because of precipitation. Or instead of, how much do you think it costs to go on the field trip? Say, what do you estimate? Which one would you get rid of? Which one would you eliminate? So again, getting familiar and getting those tier 2 words in your own language. So actually, I had somebody who was telling a story about a teacher who would post on the ceiling several tier 2 words that she was going to use that week or that month. And she posted them on the ceiling so that she would know those are the words she's going to be targeting. So I think that's a great way to do that. And then she just switched them out. Go ahead. So far, I want to know, what are some of the 3 to 5 takeaways you've got just so far on why and how vocabulary is more than just looking up words in the dictionary, more than just being able to write a definition. So if you would, go ahead and post that in the chat or unmute. What are 3 to 5 takeaways about how vocabulary is much more than just a definition? Yes, tier 2, that impact on comprehension. Yes, also being able to apply words in different contexts. Apply the word, yeah. I love the reasoning behind not just looking at the words in dictionary. So what's interesting is I've done this training specifically for middle and high school, just middle and high school. And I will never forget, they talked about how eye-opening this is for middle and high school. Yes, the shades of meaning, those subtle nuances between words as our standards include. Okay, go ahead. Now let's talk about how to teach words. How to teach words. Let's talk first about the federal laws. Go ahead. So when we talk about the federal laws, there's 2 that guide instruction. We have, of course, have Every Student Succeeds Act. That is the law, the federal law that guides general education instruction. We also have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that's the law that governs students with a disability, so special education. Well, the general education law, Every Student Succeeds Act, requires that or states that comprehensive literacy instruction means explicit, systematic, intentional instruction in phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, language structures, which is made up of morphology and syntax, fluency, and comprehension. Now, as you see, I've outlined here, we've got the what. All of those different areas are the what, but we're going to spend the rest of this time focusing on the how, the explicit, systematic, and intentional instruction. I also want to point out why this is so critical for special education as well. And that's because the purpose of special education or specially designed instruction is to meet that student's unique disability in order to access general education curriculum in order to meet the standards, including ELA standards, that apply to all children. So this is a very critical point to talk about that how piece based on federal law. Go ahead. So now let's talk about explicit. What do we mean when we say explicit instruction? Go ahead. So first we need to think about, back up. All right, so how many words? How many words do they need to know in order to comprehend what they read? Well, from the research, from the data, what we know is that students need to read or understand 90 to 95% of the words on the page in order to understand the content. The other 5% you can likely get from being making inferences within the context. But again, they need to know 90 to 95% of the words. So I ask you, as a proficient reader, when was the last time you just picked something up to read and you didn't know at least 90% of the words? Number one, did you keep going? Number two, did you understand it? So we have an activity. So here we go. This is also in your handout, but I'm going to give you the accommodation right now of reading it aloud. So here we go. Is marking a on a measuring This involves the relationship between of a measuring and or which must be For example, placing a in melting ice to see whether it reads 0 to check it has been correctly. You ready for your pop quiz? Pop quiz. What do you need to mark a scale on a measuring instrument? What is an example of calibration? What is the relationship between the indications of measuring instruments and the reference values that must be applied? So that was an example of 75% of words known. So I hope you get a really good understanding of how important it is that they know 90 to 95% of the words in the text. Go ahead. So when we talk about vocabulary instruction, the first thing I want us to appreciate is that pre-teaching vocabulary is not an accommodation. Pre-teaching vocabulary before the unit or before the context is for everybody, and it benefits everybody. And based on the research, pre-teaching is useful for learners of all ages and grades, preschool through grade 12. And the reason for that is when you pre-teach the vocabulary, now when they're reading and they get to a word they're not familiar with, they don't have to stop and think about the meaning or even the pronunciation. So they've already got that stored in there. So that allows them to read all the way through with no interruption, which then no longer interrupts that flow of comprehension. And because that flow of comprehension is not compromised, now they can make inferences, prediction, compare and contrast, make connections, all of those additional reading skills that support deep comprehension. Go ahead. So how do I choose these words? How should I explicitly teach vocabulary? Well, this is another one that's in your handout. So now we're talking about systematic instruction. Go ahead. So the very first thing that I asked you to do as you came in was to rank those words on a scale of 1 to 4. So number 1 would be, I've never seen this word. I've never heard this word. I have no idea what you're talking about. 2 would be, oh, I've heard this word. I'm not sure what it means, but I've heard it somewhere. 3 would be, oh, this word has something to do with loud noises. Loud noises. Oh, what's that word? And then 4 is I know this word. I know what it means and I can use it. Now, the reason I include that as an activity is because, go ahead and click, students who have more vocabulary at those bottom levels at 3 and 4, they demonstrate better reading comprehension and those use of context clues when they come into new words. So when you're trying to figure out which words should I teach, one of the best things you can do is ask your students to rank words or a word list on a scale of 1 to 4. That will let you know exactly what they do know and what they don't know and what level you want to get them to. Go ahead. So now let's talk about intentional instruction. What do we mean when we say intentional instruction in vocabulary? Of course, we intend for them to understand what the words mean. Well, go ahead. So when we talk about intentional instruction, go ahead. Intentional instruction means making connections across the standards and indicators. So what I mean by that is making the connection with indicators aligned with phonological awareness, which I'll explain. Making connections with morphology, those standards and indicators related to morphology, which I'll explain. With phonics, which I'll explain, and with syntax or sentence structure, all of which I'm going to explain right now. Go ahead. Oh, and mental imagery. Yes, all of those that I'm going to explain right now. So first of all, these are some of those other standards and indicators that I just mentioned. So in foundations of literacy, we have phonological awareness. Application of reading, we have morphology. Foundations, again, we have phonics as well as word analysis. And then right there in application of reading, I want you to focus on that word that I have right there in red, phrases, because we're going to talk about why phrases is so important. Go ahead. So I love this part of the presentation. So why and how does phonological awareness have any impact or anything to do with vocabulary? I will tell you. So here we go. So I want you to think about right now, what is the difference in the sounds, not the letters and not the spelling, but the sounds or the sound pattern in the words habit and habitat? What do you think the difference is between those two words in the sounds? Habit, habitat. Well, because this is a webinar and not as necessarily interactive with people here with me, I'm going to go ahead and tell you. So I'm going to show you by demonstrating it. So here we go. Habit, habitat. So what's the difference in the sounds, the phonology? Number of syllables. Now stop here to make sure and do an important point to say, do not clap syllables, because you and I always know that in one class, there's always that one kid who will go, let's say you're trying to figure out the number of syllables in habitat, and they go, habitat. Right. So now we know that student doesn't know or how to segment those syllables, but now he's interrupted the sound field for everybody else. So the benefit of putting one finger down for each syllable is all you're doing is segmenting, and then there's your answer. Then there's your number. So it decreases that cognitive load of having to segment and count at the same time. All right, now let's think about the difference in the sounds, the phonology between the next pair of words. People, pupa. What's the difference in the sounds of those two words? People, pupa. Give you a moment to think on it. People, pupa. Well, they're both a consonant vowel syllable shape. What's different? What about the sounds are different? The vowels. The vowels change. Now, I want you to think carefully about if you were not aware of how those vowel sounds were different in people and pupa, When the teacher is saying pupa, you're still hearing people because you're not phonologically aware of the differences in the vowels, the differences in the vowel sounds and how that would impact their understanding of the meaning. That's phonological awareness. All right, what about the next example? Specific, Pacific. Now this one's a little more common, a little easier to figure out. Specific, Pacific. What's the difference in the phonology, in the sounds of the word? Yes, the beginning blend. Now there's a very important reason that I include this, and that is because many languages and dialects do not have consonant blends in initial position or in final position. I'll say that again. Many languages and dialects do not include consonant blends either at the beginning or the end. So here's an example of how this impacts meaning. So I was once working with a fourth grader. We were working on their social studies text, and that happened to be on westward expansion and the gold rush. Well, he was a fluent English speaker, but he was a native Spanish speaker. So I'm scaffolding, I'm drawing pictures, I'm doing all the things. And he finally looks at me and he goes, "Oh, you're not talking about soccer. You're talking about the gold rush." He was hearing gold rush instead of gold rush. And that difference is because in Spanish, they do not have consonant clusters at the end of words. All right, now let's think about advice and advise. I just did that backwards. Advise and advice. What's the difference in the sounds, not the letters, the sounds? Any guesses? Yes, it's the ending consonant sound. And it's not soft and hard G because that would be phonics. That would be what it looks like. It's voiced and unvoiced. Advice, advise. And again, if you're not aware of how they sound different, you're going to struggle to understand how the meaning is different. And this one we see a lot. All right, last one, affect and effect. What's the difference in the sounds? I'll go ahead for the sake of time and go ahead and tell you. So a lot of people are going to say it's the vowel, but often in conversation, the first vowel in those two words gets reduced to a schwa, to that lazy sound. What's different, however, is the syllable stress. Affect, effect. Again, if you struggle with being phonologically aware of how those words are different, you're going to struggle to understand how the meaning is different, not only with affect and effect, but record and record, minute and minute. That's all specific to phonological awareness. Go ahead. So without that awareness of how words sound different, there's going to be a struggle to understand how the meaning is different, because phonological awareness is what allows us to compare words we know, those tier 1 words, with words we don't know yet. There's tier 2 words. Think again about people and pupa. All right, go ahead. Now, here's why using those tier 2 words is so important in your conversation with your students. It's because we put written words into our long-term memory by anchoring them to their sound, not their meaning. That is not what we have thought of traditionally. But let me give you an example of why written words are put into long-term memory as an automatic fluent sight word that we pull up automatically by anchoring them to their sounds, not their meaning. So in the first example, the word in red, let's say you get a student and they get to that word and they go, suspicious, 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 suspicious. I've heard that word before. Now it clicks over to meaning. My mom says I look suspicious when I'm by the pantry before dinner. So it clicked here in sound as a word they've heard before. Technically, that's what's referred to as phonological long-term memory. Then it went to meaning. Then it went to meaning. Now contrast it with this. So you have a student who's looking now at the word in blue. Convalesce, 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 convalesce. Somewhere in there was the correct pronunciation, but it never clicked here, so it never went to meaning. Never clicked in phonological long-term memory for a word they've heard before, so it never went to meaning. Go ahead. So now let's talk about morphology. Now, morphology, this is again one of those terms that I asked you in that initial activity. See if you are familiar with that term. Well, vocabulary and morphology are important because 80% of English words contain multiple morphemes or multiple units of meaning. And that makes up those 80% of words with the multiple meanings, that makes up the most of the unfamiliar words in text, in our text. So if we want to help them better understand the text, we need to help them better understand the little morphemes. And that's because the English language is referred to as a morphophonemic language, meaning morpho, meaning meaning, and phoneme, meaning sound. So our language, General American English, is made up of morphemes, units of meaning, and units of sound. This is different from, say, Chinese or other Asian languages, or even sign language. So if you're familiar with sign language, if you were going to fingerspell every single word, that would be phonemic. But sign language isn't like that. And neither is Chinese script. Those represent specific meaning. So for example, this is sign, this is language. It's not each individual morpheme, it's not each individual sound. It's only representing the meaning. Same thing for this. Here's my favorite one. And some maybe disagree, but here's a great one to know. Ready? Clemson Tigers. Now, I've given you some examples of what this looks like by breaking it down in terms of adding that additional morpheme. Go ahead. Now, here's how morphology overlaps with phonics. And you already know this. There's specific patterns. There's specific rules, rather say patterns, that guide how can we put these morphemes onto a word. So for example, there's a specific pattern for when we double that final consonant when we add ing. There's a specific pattern for when we drop the E or keep the E when adding a suffix, a morpheme. Same thing for when we change Y to I. There's a specific pattern for adding those morphemes. Go ahead. Now let's talk about Greek and Latin roots. And again, this really sort of connects back with the morphology because, again, over half of our English words come from Greek and Latin roots. So when we teach them these individual units of meaning, now we're not just teaching that word, we're teaching them words we will never know that they've been exposed to for the rest of their life. So here's a great example. I want you in the chat really quickly, type some words that you know have that root mal. How many words can you put in the chat that you know have that root mal? Dismal, malnourished, malpracticed, animal, maleficent, malicious, malice, malfunction, malcontent. Oh, y'all have got some great ones in here. So here's what I want you to think about. So somebody put in there maleficent. And yeah, mal means bad. So we know Maleficent is not a good character. What about Malfoy? Anybody ever thought about Malfoy? You think J.K. Rowling knew exactly what she was doing when she named that character Malfoy? And how many of us internally knew that character was likely going to be bad because we recognize that root? So again, teaching these roots gives away meaning, not just for words we want them to know, but words they'll encounter for the rest of their lives. Go ahead. Now let's talk about etymology. Some people are familiar with this term and some people aren't. Well, etymology, sort of like I demonstrated with the figurative language, where did it come from? There's an etymology for where words, individual words came from. And what's so cool about not only what I've described with the etymology of the figurative language, but the same thing for individual words. The reason this is so important is because we as humans are wired to remember story. That's why it's so much harder to remember your multiplication facts, because we're wired to remember things as story. So here's an example. So the word mortgage, that word is actually made up of two pieces. Mort, meaning death. Gage, meaning pledge. So mortgage literally means a death pledge, that upon your death or until you pay that off, you have a mortgage. So now I want you to think about how this relates to meaning and spelling. Again, that intentional instruction and then intentional thought process across our different standards. So I want you to put in the chat now some words that include the word is spelled with a CH, but the CH makes the sh sound. How many words can you think of that are spelled with a CH, but the CH makes the sh sound? Yes, chef, machine, chaperone, chef, machine, chef, yes. All right, charlatan, chartreuse, chivalry. Oh, that's a good one. Not church, because it's making that hard ch sound. But we're making this like Charlotte, yes, champagne. And that's your dead giveaway. So anytime a student comes up to you and says, why is it spelled with a CH instead of an SH? I want you to think about these 2 words or 3 words in particular that are a dead giveaway. Champagne, charcuterie, Chardonnay. Where do you think all those words are derived from? Yes, those are all words that are of French derivation. So when you're explaining the difference in the spelling, you're explaining the story behind the word. These aren't English words, so they don't follow English patterns. These are words of French derivation, which then explains the spelling. Okay, go ahead. So now let's talk about the syntax. So this is our sentence structure. And now, remember, I told you to come back to that thinking about phrasing. Well, here's what you need to know. We need to know 90 to 95% of the words on the page. But did you know that knowing only the individual word meanings, if you just knew the individual word meanings, that only accounts for about 50 to 60% of the variance in reading comprehension, which is not that much. All of that to say, it's the relationship between the words, not just the individual words, but the relationship between the words and how those words combine to create a mental image in your head. Go ahead. So I want you to think about sentences and how we put words together to make meaning. So first, I want you to think about the fact that books have a different language than we use. Similar to tier 2 words, books would use what you could refer to as tier 2 syntax, such as, we would never say, in the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. No, we would say, hey, I saw an egg on a leaf over there, right? So syntax, the syntax of books, is what introduces us to more and more complex syntax. And so hearing that makes it easier to read. And when we do that, when we better understand how sentences are put together, that's what enables us to put words into phrases, short phrase. So it could be a super long sentence, but now we're putting it into short phrases. And what we know is good readers make meaning by reading in phrases, right? Good readers don't, struggling readers limit meaning by reading word by word. So let's get an example. Oh, before we get to the example. So the English language is very well governed in terms of syntax. We are very intentional about how we put words together in general American English. So for example, there's a reason why I wouldn't say blue 1 large fresh ice cream refreshingly scoop of cotton candy. That would not make any sense to another general American speaker. You might sound like Yoda, but that's probably okay in Yoda's syntax and Yoda's language. So English is very, very rule governed. Other languages are a lot more flexible, but not English. Go ahead. So here's your example. I'm going to prove to you that if you know the syntax, if you understand the structure of the sentences, you can get the meaning. Because I know you don't know the meaning of any of these words. So here we go. This is also in your handout. Last Saturday, Flingeldope and Pribben were in the nerd link, treppering gloopy caples and cleaning burly greps. Suddenly, a ditzy stratzel boofed into Fingeldope's trask. Oh, Pribben gleept and gleept. Oh, flingeldopey jipe, that ditzy stretzel is tooting in your grip. Now, let's check your comprehension. Ready? When did this take place? Go ahead. Last Saturday. Who was with Flingeldope? Go ahead. Pribben. Where were they? In the, go ahead, Nerdlink. What were they treppering? Caples, yes. What kind of caples? Go ahead. Gloopy caples, what kind of stretzel showed up? Ditzy stretzel, were they expecting that ditzy stretzel? Go ahead. No, and what did it do? What did that ditzy, it boofed into Fingeldope's Tresk. You could answer all of those questions because you knew the syntax. Even though you didn't know the meaning of the words, you could follow and comprehend it, even though you didn't know the meaning because you were familiar with the syntax, which is based on English rules for putting words together, which is who is doing what to whom, in what way, when, and where. Go ahead. So now let's get back to the mental imagery. Again, when we're putting those words together to create a visual image. So if you think about it, when you read something, you're not just reading the words on the page, you're making a mental image. So when you're reading about the paper bag princess, you have an image that looks something like this. So mental imagery is really being able to feel or hear or see or even taste something, even though it's not right there in front of you. And this is necessary for both listening comprehension and reading comprehension. You need to be able to make these mental movies, make these mental images. And I can tell you for certain, the majority of the students that I work with who have a developmental language disorder, this is one of the #1 things that they struggle with, is coming up with these mental images. And a good way to figure out if they know it or not is if you can say, okay, here's a series of pictures. Show me a statue. Show me a Bernese mountain dog. Show me a whatever. If they can point to them all day long, they've got some good vocabulary in there. But now, ask them to tell you 3 things about their dog or their pet or their bedroom or their car. Just 3 things. It's about something they're very, very familiar with that they see every single day. If you get this, they're struggling with mental imagery, with making those mental pictures. Go ahead. So we know listening and reading comprehension correlate with this skill. It's also referred to as visual, spatial, perceptual, and nonverbal skills, such that nonverbal IQ taken in kindergarten is a predictor of 8th grade reading comprehension. Nonverbal measurements taken in 1st grade predict 5th grade comprehension. That's how key it is to make sure kids are making these mental pictures, these mental movies. Go ahead. So here's your example. I'm going to give you the accommodation again really quick. And then I'm going to ask you some questions. And then I'm going to show you how much of a difference mental imagery makes. Here we go. The procedure is quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you must go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, well, that is the next step. Otherwise, you're all set. It is important not to overdo things. That is, it's better to do too few things at once than too many. In the short run, this might not seem important, but complications can easily arise. A mistake can be expensive as well. After the procedure is completed, one arranges the materials into different groups again. Then they can be put into their appropriate places. Eventually, they'll have to be used once more and the whole cycle will have to be repeated. Pop quiz, you ready? How do you organize the groups? What if you lack facilities? What do you need to look for in a facility? What do you do last? Difficult to understand or comprehend that passage unless you know these 2 words. You ready? I'm going to instantly fix your comprehension to 100%. Folding laundry. This passage is about folding laundry. Now you have that mental image of how you would organize the groups. What facility you're looking for. What you're looking for in a facility. What you do actually at the very end, what's last. That's how much of a difference mental imagery makes. Go ahead. So what we want to do is we want to focus on teaching our students how to scoop sentences into individual phrases, into individual units of meaning and images. So this example from Charlotte's Web, instead of reading, Fern pushed the chair out of the way and ran outdoors. Go ahead, I think it's got a marker. Yeah, we want to scoop it and talk about how this one phrase has its own image. So what does it look like, or what might it look like when Fern pushed the chair out of the way? What chair? Where was she that the chair was? Did she just push it, or she pushed it out of the way? Well, the next phrase helps us better understand that. Ran outdoors. So to me, that means she didn't just scoot the chair over. She pushed it because she was in a hurry. So scooping sentences into those phrases and guiding that mental imagery helps develop that mental movie. Go ahead. So putting it all together, what do we need to do with this information tomorrow? And I know we're getting close on time, but let's go ahead and get going. So here's what you need to know. Fourth grade social studies standard includes the Declaration of Independence. Put it up. This is one sentence from the Declaration of Independence. Here we go. One sentence. When a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. Go ahead. So, go back. So on your handout, what you're going to see is questions like, which words would be figurative language? Long train of abuses. Which words would be tier 2 words? Which words would be tier 3 words? Which ones, like the word evinces? Why would evinces be difficult? Because it sounds like convinces. So all of those different kinds of questions are in your handout in order to help you think through how important all of these different overlapping aspects of vocabulary are. That it's not just about the definition, but how important it is to be explicit, systematic, and intentional in your instruction. Go ahead.
I think this is still you, Angie.
Oh, so what are 3 takeaways you've gotten from today? What are 3 big things you took away from this very quick hour talking about vocabulary? Or if you'd rather, go ahead and what are 2 lingering questions that you still have about teaching vocabulary? Or what is one thing you're taking away? One big next step that you're going to start to apply based on the instruction that you've gotten today. So if you type either a 3, 2, or 1 and what that is in the chat, that would be wonderful so we can get some immediate feedback on what you thought. So 3 key takeaways, 2 lingering questions, or 1 next step that you can take based on what you've heard today. So how important the tier level is, stay away from dictionaries, focus on tier 2, stretch the idea of vocabulary beyond just the definition. Yes, having students rank words, focusing on tier 2, yes, ranking words, highlighting, and again, that mental imagery, helping them create that, watching for if you see they don't have mental imagery, because again, that's one of the #1 things that's going to impact your comprehension. Examples were very helpful. How much goes into really teaching and understanding vocabulary, understanding the relationship of vocabulary, all of these things. Yes, all of the above. All of these are great. Thank you so much.
And before we move into clarity and closure, we do have an interest form here as well, if you're interested in additional vocabulary support. Since today was kind of a quick run through, if there's any area of vocabulary where you feel like you need a slightly deeper dive, we do have that form there that you can complete. And then whenever we send out the recording as well, we can add that in your links. So lots of different opportunities there if you have interest in additional support. So with that, we'll move into our clarity and closure, and just looping back to our purpose for today, which was to provide guidance and support for vocabulary instruction as it relates to our 2023 South Carolina College and Career Ready ELA standards. We had 2 success criteria for participants to articulate 3 to 5 key takeaways relative to how vocabulary is more than just definitions, and then identify at least one next step to apply strategies for explicit, systematic, and intentional vocabulary instruction. So I just want to ask, did we meet our goals for this session today? And I can't see the chat, so Angie's going to have to tell me. Do you feel that we have met our goals? Did we do what we said we were going to do when we started out?
We have yeses with exclamation marks. We have absolutely. We have yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Love to hear it. All right. So the last thing that we will do, and we'll hang around for a little bit as well, to linger and listen if you have any questions or anything like that. The last thing that we want to do today is provide an opportunity for feedback. So Brenna is going to drop our feedback form in the chat. Our feedback form helps us to tailor our sessions to really meet the needs of the field. So it's really quick, just lets us know if you felt that the session was relevant and actionable, and if you did have any feedback that you wanted to give about how we could better this session. We'll take just a couple minutes to fill that out. And other than that,
and while they do that, somebody asked if we're going to receive a copy of the presentation. I wasn't sure if that was already sent out or posted somewhere.
Not yet. So what will happen is once we get the recording, so we'll upload the recording to our YouTube channel. And once we get that posted, we will email back out with the recording and then any links to today's session. So the handout we'll send again, the interest form we'll send again, and then we will also send out a participant copy of the slides. So yes, you'll get all of those resources. Usually within a week is about how long it takes for us to get the recording link back. So other than that, I think we're just going to linger and listen. Again, if you're filling out the feedback form, you could call this session vocabulary instruction. I'm Casey Prince Harvey, and then Angie Neal really drove today's presentation. You're not going to see her name on the form, so you can just add it in the comments. That way we know that she's also included in that. And other than that, I think I'm going to close out the slides. And then we'll just hang out a little bit longer if you have any questions or feedback or anything else that we can help you with. But thank you so much for attending today. We so appreciate you taking some time to hang out with us. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
So far, just in the chat, just some thanks. If you have additional questions, you're welcome to type those or unmute, all of the above.
Yes, absolutely. We are here to linger and listen.